Hi, everyone, and welcome. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Theodore Postol, Professor Emeritus of Science, Technology, and International Security at MIT. Also renowned for being a leading scholar in nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles, missile defense, and other weapons systems that can destroy humanity. And for this reason, beyond academia, also advising the Pentagon. Welcome back to the program. It's great to have you on again.
Very nice to be back. It's unfortunately, I guess I could say it's very nice to be back, but it's unfortunate that I'm back because I have vowed to minimize my time on the internet, except when I have something unique to offer, unique to my skills. And unfortunately, it looks like we have another subject unique to my skills to deal with.
Yes, and this is what we have been speaking of, which is the Trump's proposed Golden Dome with space-based components, which is a missile defense program. But again, as scholars of international security know, whenever they use the word defense, it does mean it's not disruptive. And of course, you can always have a discussion to what extent something is really defensive, as most defensive weapons can also be used offensively. And again, you've been kind enough to be willing to share some of your thoughts on this Golden Dome. Also have some slides. But if we just start with the overarching issue, what is the Golden Dome for the people who are not following
Well,
the details?
the Golden Dome is, in my view, it's a political construct. It really it has no merit technically. We'll talk about that shortly. But what it does do is it allows Trump to play to his base. That is to say, he's defending America, United States, from all these threats, from nuclear threats from all over the world, both small and large. I mean, some of these threats are large now, like China and of course Russia. Some of these threats are much smaller, like North Korea, uh, which incidentally is is unlikely to be effectively negated with any of the defense systems that the United States currently has or can predictably have in the future. So it's a small threat in terms of numbers of missiles, but it's not something that's meaningless in terms of its threat to the United States. But the fact of the matter is that the technology is not really there for these kinds of missile defenses. There are two kinds of defenses that Trump is now talking about. First, he's talking about beefing up the current missile defense systems that the United States has. These would be the Navy Aegis-based Standard Missile 3 interceptors that are at sea now. It's hard to know. It's the Pentagon's been very um, uh, obfuscating with regard to the number of standard missile threes, SM3s. There are basically two kinds of SM3s. There's the Block 1A and Block 2A. The 1A has a burnout speed of about 3 kilometers per second, which is really not usable for even shorter range missiles. It's really a very minimalist system. The Block 2A has a burnout speed that's higher, about 4.5 kilometers per second, which is enough to look somewhat like a capability, but really isn't a capability. And then there's the ground-based missile defense system, which is about some 40 odd, 44 is the current number, interceptors, which look like ICBMs. In fact, what I can do here is just take a quick count. Um,
Well, it seems that yeah, because nuclear weapons are a key deterrent, it's defined often as a defensive weapon. The initial ABM treaty, the anti-ballistic missile treaty, had the logic that it was dangerous because it could convert nuclear weapons from a defensive into an offensive weapon, with the logic that the United States could never intercept the vast amount of Soviet missiles, but which would survive a first strike and thus be used in a retaliatory strike on the United States. But with a powerful missile defense, the idea was it could enable a first strike, that is, just a surprise
yes,
attack.
that's in principle, but
Yeah.
it also the the ABM Treaty of 1972 in its prologue um, uh, basically points out that in very simple language, I might say it's an interesting treaty to actually read the original language to. In the preamble to the treaty, it basically says, if you have missile defenses, it's going to be nearly impossible because the potential capabilities of these missile defenses will not be easily ignored by uh, by leadership of the different countries. So as long as you have these missile defenses, you're going to have a powerful incentive to expand your offensive nuclear forces to overcome them. That's the obvious and simple way to overcome a defensive system is just build more a defensive system, build more offensive systems. And so the preamble to the ABM Treaty actually points out that the ABM Treaty is the critical treaty in order to have arms limitations. So the Strategic Arms Limitations Treaty was, of course, was negotiated around that time, the first treaties. So that's the problem. The problem is that you get kind of the worst of both worlds with these missile defenses, because a reasonable question for people to ask, given at least my arguments, which is that they don't work, is, so why are you concerned about them? If you're not, what's to be concerned about if they don't work? Well, the problem is that neither, no adversary can be sure that the capabilities of an existing defense isn't greater than they thought or couldn't change with some technical innovation and change in a time that is short relative to your ability to modify your offensive forces. So that's the underlying concern that political leaders, and of course, there's the appearance of having capability, which results in or could result in political leverage that political leaders are also concerned about, because if you have an adversary with political leverage, that's a big concern in an eyeball to eyeball confrontation. So another reason you would not want the appearance of any capability of a missile defense, even if it's not very good, to be to be a factor in any political confrontation. And then, of course, you have the problem that concerns Putin most. And I think Putin is very concerned about this. If you look at his statements very carefully, it is extremely clear that he is very well informed about the limitations of American missile defenses. So he is not afraid that American missile defenses have any capability, but he is afraid of American missile defenses because he is worried that American leaders are so ill-informed that at some time he might face an American president who actually thinks that these American missile defenses have some capability. And if the person is so ill-informed that they think these systems have some capability, they may do something in a crisis that could force the Russians to respond. Because, for example, if the United States attacked Russia with some misunderstanding that they could actually deal with a Russian counterattack, the escalation, the outcome would, in terms of global escalation to destruction of civilization, would occur, independent, just because of the complete lack of understanding by the American political decision maker. And that is absolutely clearly one of Putin's great concerns. And frankly, I tend to share his concern, because I've dealt enough with American political leadership, and incidentally, American military leadership, to know how totally ignorant and ill-informed some high-level decision makers, both military and civilian, can be. And that really ill-informed characteristic, that thread through American political decision making, is a concern, because people could do something really dangerous, incredibly ill-informed, that could start things going in a way that nobody will be able to stop. So, so I think there are a lot of levels of consideration as to why these missile defenses can be problematic, and of course the underlying factor that is unique, which makes them also different from conventional defenses, which can often be a very good thing from a military point of view, is the fact that that the result would be a nuclear war, not a conventional military failure if your defense didn't work very well and the enemy was able to bomb with conventional forces against you. But the escalation to a war that would end civilization and possibly reduce the human population to near zero on the planet, that's a different scale of existential threat relative to just somebody being able to suppress your conventional air defenses and bomb you effectively with conventional explosives. So the nuclear strategic missile defense problem is really quite unique. And but here before you, can you see my cursor? Probably not.
Yes, can see.
You can see. Oh, that's good. All right. So the surface-based interceptors that the United States is contemplating enriching, enhancing, are the ground-based missile defense interceptors. They're sometimes called GBIs, and these are really basically small ICBMs. They launch an interceptor that weighs maybe 1 or 200 pounds, and the interceptor homes on a target. I won't go into detail now, but I will talk a little bit about it later if our conversation moves in that direction. And this intercept is around 50,000 pounds, and there are about 44 of them right now. So it's not clear to me exactly what Trump is proposing, but he's probably proposing an expansion of the number of these interceptors. But the number is really quite small relative to the forces of China and Russia. just 44 of them. Incidentally, their intercept rate is very likely to be near zero for reasons I can talk about later. And then there's this second class of interceptors, the SM-3, Standard Missile 3 block, the Block 2A, and there's a Block 1A, but this never achieves a speed high enough that it's even theoretically much of a threat. The 2A achieves a speed of about 4.5 kilometers per second, and it's a very marginal threat. Again, I'll explain why in terms of missile defense capability, but it's on ships. And these ships can move anywhere in the world, so they have the potential to be moved to locations where they they could be used in a variety of applications. So, for example, um, if we if we look at if you put this Standard Missile 3 on ships and you move them close to the United States, the 4.5 kilometer interceptor could be used against a strategic attack from either Russia or China. You could have it. And of course, the larger, faster interceptor could, in principle, cover the entire United States. Now, the problem, rather than beat around the bush, let me just explain why these surface-based missiles really have no capability to be of concern, at least to any adversary. The real problem is decoys. If you look at decoys that could be built, the interceptors all work in the near vacuum of space, and it's very easy to build a balloon that will travel along with a warhead. Here, in fact, if I show you here, here's a particular balloon that's in the shape of a warhead, but it doesn't have to be in the shape of a warhead because you have no spatial resolution when you're looking with an infrared camera from the interceptor. This is actually an actual warhead, which is mimicked by this balloon. But again, you don't really need to do a full balloon of this kind. Here's a rigid decoy, but simple balloons of this type will also work fine against the defense. So if you were at a homing interceptor, you would see a bright object, and you're traveling at close to the object's coming at you at 7 kilometers per second. You're coming at the object at 7 or 8 kilometers per second. So your closing speed's like 15 kilometers per second. So in 5 seconds, you're basically 100 kilometers, nearly 100 kilometers apart. So in 5 seconds, you have to see this object, study it carefully enough because you don't have full resolution, and maneuver your interceptor so you're going to hit it. And in the 5 seconds you have to maneuver, and that's a very hard thing to do. But this is what the missile defense designers wish they would see. In fact, what we're sure, absolute certainty they would see is this. They would see, objects, all of which appear different from each other, including the warhead could be made to look different. And there's just no way, there's no technical way, no science. So I'm not talking about technology, no science that would allow you to pick out the warhead relative to decoys. So these systems are useless. You would never have started building them if you understood, which incidentally we did understand, that the decoys could not be separated from the warheads. My university, MIT, was involved in a scientific fraud where they claimed in 1997 and 98, so it's more than 25 years ago, that they had test data that could actually help, indicated that they had a chance of telling warheads from decoys. My university, MIT. So, and I became persona non grata with the MIT administration. And I say the MIT administration, this what three presidents of MIT who were involved with this fraud against the American people, making false statements about the capabilities of these missile defenses. And the result of this is hundreds of billions of dollars have been have been spent on these defense systems, which have no chance of working at all. Just no chance at all. Anybody who can build a ballistic missile and put a nuclear warhead on top of it is more than able to put to inflate a balloon and toss it out along with the warhead. That the balloon weighing, a few hundreds or tens of grams weight, hundreds of balloons or dozens of balloons, and defeat this missile defense. There's no sophistication involved at all in this. This is a fraud on a gigantic scale. So anyway, but all right. So what Trump is talking about is expanding the number of interceptors. He claims he's going to make some improvements in the technology. Those improvements would be meaningless because you can't tell the decoys from the warheads. That's fundamental. So the really unique part of this system is the space-based part of the system. This is unique and different from anything else that has been put on the table as a major program that the United States will move forward on. People have talked about space-based interceptors, but the country has never committed itself to building such a system. But Trump appears to be saying that he's going to go ahead with a space-based system. Now, the way the space-based system works is you put satellites in orbit. So let me just show you a typical example. This is a situation where, again, you can see the cursor, so hopefully. So you would put satellites in orbits that are relatively low. You can't put them so low that atmospheric drag won't be a problem. For example, you could put, I've depicted here a 400-kilometer altitude satellite. It could be 300 kilometers, which would put it closer to the ground where it could engage an ICBM rising from the surface of the Earth. But the problem is that air drag would require the satellites to be boosted. So they would only have relatively, they'd have lives of maybe a few years in orbit. So you'd have to boost them up. It's very expensive to launch them. You'd have to be maintaining them in orbit. So I just chose a 400-kilometer altitude, which is not the best choice because air drag can be a problem there as well, but a good compromise. And I decided that, incidentally, all these numbers are very close to numbers other organizations and analyses have come up with. So nothing here is out of line. And I chose, just for illustration purposes, an interceptor that would be 5 kilometers per second in a 400-kilometer satellite orbit. So you have space interceptors housed in what you might call a space satellite. The satellite would have a housing, a garage for the interceptor. The interceptor just can't sit in space. There's radiation. It needs power. It needs temperature control. It needs communication systems. It's going to be in space for years. So, and so that's an important set of considerations. A reasonable guess for the weight of one of these satellites, including its interceptor, might be about 2 tons. Could be 1,500 kilograms. It's unlikely to be 2 tons. It's probably going to be bigger than that. But it doesn't really matter. Right now, it's fiction. It's what I call view graph systems, which the Pentagon is very good at, proposing view graph systems that are never built or never or turn out to run into technical problems that are overwhelming. There are technical problems here. I'll assume, for the sake of just general discussion, that the technical problems can be solved. That should not be taken as a given, but I'll just assume that for purposes of describing a potential system to your audience. So at this location, this red location here, I assume that a distant space-based satellite sensor system observes the launch near the surface of an ICBM, quite a distance, thousands of kilometers downrange from the satellite orbit. And I assume maybe 20 seconds is spent while the distant satellite tracks the initial flight of the ICBM, so we know what direction it's going, because we're going to launch an interceptor. We have to know where to try to choose an intercept point. And then we assume at this point here, after maybe 20 or 30 seconds, we launch an interceptor at maybe 70 or 80 seconds. The satellite has moved maybe roughly easily 1,000 kilometers downrange or more. The interceptor has gone through an acceleration phase and is coasting, and then maybe 160 or 170 seconds from the initial detection of a launch, the interceptor would be in a position to hit the ICBM before it finishes powered flight. So that's the idea. And if you wanted to see what one of these constellations look like, this is a constellation. I just put this together with some analysis I did from an earlier time. And these blue circles here show you the range of the interceptor after it finishes its powered flight. So this is the maximum range at which the intercept can occur. So, for example, if there's a launch of an ICBM at this location shown here, again, you can see the cursor. Is that right? Glenn, you can see the cursor or no?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
on the right model here, yeah.
Yeah, so here is an intercept point. So this is roughly the region from which the ICBM would be launched. This this white circle here shows you the area, the location of the satellite when the launch began, and this shows you the rough distance the satellite went before the actual intercept occurs. Now, in this view here, I can let's see if I can do this. I'm gonna stop share, and we go back to share. Can you see this video now?
Yes, it's up now.
Okay, all right. So let me turn it on. This is a video just showing you the motion of these satellites. Now, keep in mind that these satellites are moving. So some of the time you can see there's much more space between the satellites than at other times. So if you're going to size, if you're going to produce a constellation size with a large enough number of satellites that they will, for example, there will always be one satellite in a location where it will be possible to engage a single ICBM launched from the surface of the Earth, then you're going to need a certain number of satellites in orbit. And that number is probably close to 2,000 satellites. In this particular depiction, I have 288 satellites. So, so, um, so, um, so let's turn on the shading. So the situation is that you would need a couple of thousand of these satellites in orbit to be able to engage one ICBM launch from the surface of the Earth. If you were from anywhere on the surface of the Earth within the orbital characteristics that you chose, in this case, is a 45-degree inclination orbit. You could make the orbits slightly higher or slightly lower in inclination, but you basically get a number between 1,500 and 2,000 satellites needed. So, for example, just to give you a sense of what you actually might have to contend with, if you wanted to be able to engage one ICBM from any launch from anywhere on the surface of the Earth, and you had needed 2,000 satellites, you would thereby need to launch about 4,200 tons into orbit, which would cost you about $4.2 billion. But the counter to this system is, well, what if I'm dealing with North Korea? North Korea, it's reasonable to expect North Korea could launch 10 ICBMs at some future time once they have them ready to go. So you would have to have, instead of 2,000 satellites in orbit, you need 20,000 satellites in orbit. That would cost you $42 billion to launch them. And if you needed to deal with an ICBM field, which could launch well more than 100 ICBMs within the parameters of a single satellite, you might have to put 200,000 satellites into orbit, which would cost you $420 billion to launch. Now, this is a very misleading numbers that I'm giving you, because the $4.2 billion for launching is if I simply launch dirt into, the weight into orbit. I haven't built the satellites. I haven't paid the price to build those satellites. So let's say it cost me $20 billion to build the satellites and launch them. That's pretty generous. So $20 billion would become 200 billion, which would then become a couple of trillion dollars. So you would potentially need trillions of dollars to build a meaningful defense, because Trump is saying he would like to be able to defend the United States from small and large attacks. It's his claim. And he claims he's going to commit $175 billion to this. And I think if he does spend this money, I think it's easy to predict the United States will get absolutely no defensive capability from it. But I think there will be a great danger created by this system. And that's because the system has an extraordinary anti-satellite capability. So in this diagram here, I show you 3 satellites postulated in 400-kilometer altitude orbits. So if we look at the green satellite first, if I the interceptor for this satellite has a 5 kilometer per second capability because it's allegedly designed to be able to shoot down an ICBM coming up from the surface of the Earth. But if I want to use this interceptor to instead attack a military early warning satellite in geosynchronous orbit, all I need is 2 kilometers per second to get to that orbit in 6 hours. And in fact, if I use half of the velocity of the 5 kilometer per second interceptor, I can get there in 3 hours. And if I use the 5 kilometer per second, I can get there in 1.5 to 2 hours. So I have a very rapid, short warning attack capability to satellites at all meaningful levels. What I've shown here are the orbits of the global positioning satellite systems and GLONASS. So these satellites are at a 20,000 kilometer altitude above the Earth's surface. Geosynchronous satellites rotate have an orbital period of 24 hours. So they essentially rotate around the Earth at the same rate at which the Earth rotates. So they appear to be stationary above a region of the Earth. And so that these satellite orbits are very good for military communications, commercial communications, television, phone, all kinds of communications, and early warning and surveillance. And, they are absolutely critical to the military nuclear warfighting capabilities of the United States, Russia, and China. So these satellites would be immediately at risk. And note that the numbers of these satellites are tens of satellites. So we're talking about tens of thousands of these satellites if you're going to have a missile defense system. So the moment you begin deploying these satellites into space with interceptors, within a very short time, you're going to have an overwhelming anti-satellite capability that would threaten the warfighting capabilities of China and Russia, as well as potentially other countries. So this is a great problem that will create a threat to international stability that it's hard to know what the responses will be. Satellites can be thought of as essentially stationary objects. An orbit is perfectly known. The location of an orbit is perfectly known. So the satellites spend a large part of their time in sunlight. So the interceptor doesn't even need to be an infrared homing interceptor. In other words, it could be optical homing. And optical homing interceptors are very easy to build because optical focal plane arrays that work in the visible light range. Every camera you buy is capable of doing that. Making these exotic infrared homing interceptors is harder to do. And so the United States does have an advantage at this moment, at this time. It won't maintain the advantage. But most of these satellites, all of the satellites, will be in sunlight a reasonable period of time. So if the counter to this system is to attack the American satellites, because they're going to be at 400-kilometer altitudes, so they're going to be relatively low altitude satellites. So what you could do is you could launch the Standard Missile 3 4.5 kilometer per second satellites, which incidentally is a souped-up air defense missile built by Russia or China. So they wouldn't need to build much. to be able to attack these satellites at the 400-kilometer altitude that they operate at. And of course, the ground-based missile defense system with a much bigger and faster interceptor could go to 13 or 14,000 kilometers. But even the fact that those exist today does not pose the kind of threat that the space-based system will pose, because none of these systems are capable of reaching the high altitude systems that are very critical for the warfighting and early warning and surveillance capabilities of foreign states. So this introduces a new problem independent of defensive capabilities. In other words, this system is going to immediately and convincingly look like a gigantic anti-satellite threat to Russia and China and other countries. And it's hard to know how this could play out. I just don't know what to predict in terms of how other countries could react. The problem is that if you look at the populations of satellites in orbits, the low Earth orbits are very densely populated. There's a lot of things you want to do in low Earth orbits. So these thousands of space-based interceptors would be in these low Earth orbits. Now, if you attacked these satellites, you would create tremendous amounts of debris from broken up satellites, satellite debris. Now, the satellite debris, there are good, sound, technical, and scientific analyses that show that the amount of debris you could create would be so large, because these satellites are low altitude and the density of debris would be high, that you would not be able to launch satellites into low Earth orbits for hundreds of years after such a fight, because the debris would be so dense that if you put a satellite into orbit, it would only last weeks or months before it got hit by a piece of debris from the earlier satellite destructions. So you would literally exclude low Earth satellite capabilities for hundreds of years, unless you had some scheme, which nobody seems to know how to do at this point, to remove all this debris from satellite orbits, because there's not enough aerodynamic drag to cause these things to drop from orbit. So you really have the possibility that you will create gigantic gaps in altitudes where very, very useful satellite operations now occur and would occur for the foreseeable future. For example, now you have things like low altitude satellites like Starlink, which would not be able to operate. And so the Starlink is useful because it's low altitude, it's a proliferated satellites, because they don't have to be very expensive. There are very large numbers of them. They're small, they're inexpensive. And terminals to take advantage of Starlink are also much less expensive, and will get less expensive, even less expensive as time goes on. So you'll have, satellite, internet, satellite-based communications on a much more global and inexpensive scale as time goes on. But that will not be possible if you destroy these low Earth orbiting satellites. So the real problem is that you cannot afford a war in space that wouldn't have consequences for hundreds of years for the use of space for all of humankind. So this is the problem that's now being posed by uh, the deployment of this system. Otherwise, it's a good idea.
Well, as you began to say, it's costly. It might not be very efficient, but it would perhaps embolden uninformed political leaders to think they can raise up the escalation ladder because the opponent would have to back down. And of course, among with the opponent, it would fuel a fear which would require a larger nuclear stockpile, which doesn't sound like a recipe for international security and stability, though. What does this do with the existing agreements in terms of not weaponizing space?
Well, space would be overwhelmingly weaponized. It would be, I don't know, unless countries like Russia and China choose to not react to this threat to their satellites. I don't know what they'll do. I mean, it's a bad thing for them to react, but on the other hand, it's a terrible thing for the United States. It's a terribly aggressive thing for the United States to do. So, it's unknowable to me, at least. I can't predict what the Russians and Chinese would choose to do. One thing they could choose to do that would be minimalist is to build surface-based interceptors, which are highly mobile. They could be launched from airplanes, for example. It's possible to do this to get at low Earth orbit satellites. And they would design the capability to punch a hole, punch a hole in the system so that they could then launch missiles, smaller numbers of missiles through the holes they punch in the system. That might be a minimal kind of response. They would still be destroying significant numbers of satellites. They might have to destroy several hundred of these satellites. If you had a full constellation, they might have, if they wanted to launch, let's say, 5 or 10 interceptors and be assured that they wouldn't be engageable by a system of a couple of 100,000, space satellites, you might have to launch a few hundred anti-satellite interceptors to punch a hole in the system so that you'd have a hole that you could fly through. But that wouldn't be a minor provocation from the point of view of the Chinese or the Russians. But that would be, I think, the minimalist response. The less minimalist response is for them to launch their own space-based interceptors, and the space-based interceptors would be pointed at the satellite constellation, not necessarily the low orbit satellite constellation, not necessarily ICBMs or higher altitude satellites. But you could give it the capability to go after the higher altitude satellites so that you have a reciprocal threat. Now, that would, of course, be a very bad thing to do, but that would be a provoked response. So none of the responses that I can imagine, assuming there are responses, are very good. I mean, they will all deeply destabilize the situation, creating very short warning times for political decision makers on all sides. And that's the last thing we need. We should be doing things to increase the early warning times because the early warning times are already much too short, much too short.
There was a time when this kind of plans to weaponize space would have caused a bit of an uproar and pushback from from your former colleagues as well. Is there any pushback at all for this, or because so far the criticism I've seen is that it's gonna cost a lot
Well,
of money, but from the perspective of international security,
I,
that is the security competition.
I joke with many of my colleagues who still talk to me that the community that calls itself the arms control community in the United States in particular is brain dead. They're not interested in analysis. You'll see the same stuff coming out. You won't see this in any of the publications in the American arms control community. They're talking about cost and blah, 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 blah. But, the destabilizing influence of this is this anti-satellite, which would happen immediately upon launch of even a very small fraction of an anti-missile system, which would be essentially incapable as an anti-missile system, would be a gigantic, overwhelming, destabilizing anti-satellite capability. If you can find me a source that's talking about this, I'd be interested. Um, Nobody is interested in this subject. I used to write for the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, but they reject, they pushed me off their list of authors, so I don't write for them anymore. And you know, I'm out of places to publish. So
But it was back in 2007 or 9 when China shot down its own weather satellite, and at that point it was a bit uproar. Why, creating weapons to shoot down satellites. This is, direction the world shouldn't go. Well, this seems like yeah, this is nothing like this. This is yeah, the
this
whole.
is very serious. This is very serious. I mean, the Chinese anti-satellite test was a gigantic mistake by the China. I mean, a technical mistake. The people, I've had not direct but indirect contact with, uh, you know, very highly informed people in China, and through them I've learned, there was a anti-satellite test planned, but the people involved in the planning had not fully appreciated the risk of debris. And they could have done a test that would have been uh, much less problematic. It was not intended. I mean, but here again, this shows you how unintended consequences can occur. And this test, uh, this Chinese test, very substantially increased the debris problem. Very substantially increased it. And you know, uh, a bunch of incidents of this kind could wind up excluding low Earth orbits for everyone.
But Trump recently, or a few weeks ago, expressed the desire to pursue a reduction in nuclear weapons, but he wanted a trilateral deal with the not just the Russians, but getting the Chinese in on this as well, as these are the three great powers in the world. But this certainly would sabotage his own initiative, wouldn't it? I mean,
You can't
the
build
Chinese and
massive.
Russians have the ability to reduce their nuclear stockpiles if the US is at the same time building this Golden Dome.
I mean, if if you're logical, if you read the preamble to the 1972 ABM Treaty, you don't have to, go to 10 years of college to understand the logic there. And the United States has been insisting for a long time that there's no connection. This is after the United States abrogated the ABM Treaty under George W. Bush. But you have these people. I think you called them neocons. uh, they're not only irrational in the ways that you described them; they're irrational in other ways. And the logic, these people, there is no logic to what they're talking about. You cannot have massive missile defenses with any appearance, forget alone real capability, and expect there to be arms reductions. It's not possible. No one is going to do it. It's
So,
that simple.
it's well, no point to delve into senseless speculation, but still, you would have some informed idea about the terms of the kind of reactions you would get from nuclear power, such as, well, primarily then Russia and China. How would they respond? Would they
Well, the Russians
treat?
and Chinese have made public statements together, uh, basically saying this would be extremely destabilizing. They didn't go into any details as to why, but you don't have to do my analysis. All you need to do is recognize that the connection between defenses and offense is inviolable. I mean, there's a logical connection. So I don't know what they were referring to in particular. It wouldn't surprise me if they were unaware of the anti-satellite potential that this kind of space-based defense has, because certainly in the United States, there's so little analysis done. Even when I was in the Pentagon, there was so little analysis done. It's just hard to believe. I mean, I was this single guy working in the basement of the Pentagon. Everyone used to say, Ted, come up to the E-ring, the upper floor of the E-ring where the chief of naval operation, because I was an advisor to the chief. I said, no, 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 I want to be in the basement because nobody's bothering me down here. I can do analysis. I don't have to spend my time running to every briefing that has no information in it. I can do analysis. And, some of the analysis I did was very important. Saved the United States from deploying the closely space-based MX. Three of the five Joint Chiefs voted against it because of an analysis I did. The intelligence agencies, this was not something I found that someone in the intelligence agencies brought to my attention and then I brought to the chief. I discovered the fundamental vulnerability in the system because I was doing some independent analysis. I went to the chief and explained to him this problem. And then he went to the intelligence community and said, is this nutcase advisor I have, does he know what he's talking about? And they came back and they said, yeah, we looked at his analysis, it's correct. And then he went to the Joint Chiefs and he got three of the five members of the Joint Chiefs to vote against the deployment. First time in the history of the Joint Chiefs that it ever happened. It's never happened before and never happened since. That's the level of analytical support that was in the Pentagon when I was there. And it's less now. I mean, Donald Trump says, maybe he's being accurate, maybe not, who knows. He says that he was unaware of a drone attack trying to kill Putin. That was his claim when he was interviewed, that he was not told about this. You say to yourself, what are our intelligence people doing? What is the president being told about? When I was talking, Bill Perry was a colleague of mine at Stanford, and I spent time talking with him. And I go in and I talk to him about an analysis I did of a Russian false alert that occurred in 1996 that was not as serious as many people claim, but was in fact revealed serious problems with the warning system in Russia. And Bill Perry was Secretary of Defense when that occurred. And I said to him, I described this to him, and I said, were you briefed on this? And Bill said to me, he says, no, I had no idea this ever happened until you just now told me. He was, to his credit, he was forthright about it. But what kind of intelligence system doesn't tell the Secretary of Defense that the Russians had an early warning false alert that could have resulted in a massive accidental launch from Russia? He was never even told about it. Not even told something wrong about it. He was not even told about it.
This is a problem, though, when you seek to control the information flow to influence decision making. You can end up in these situations where you
Well,
have
it's competent. It's bureaucratic competence. It's politicization. It's bureaucratic inflexibility. The intelligence community in the United States is a bureaucratic nightmare. I have nothing but sympathy for Tulsi Gabbard in her attempts to reform the system. I doubt she can succeed, but I hope I'm wrong. I think she's quite capable, and so I'm hoping that she can succeed. But it's clear to me that She hasn't been able to get enough of a change in the short time she's there. You can't blame her for this because how could Trump not be informed that there was an attempt to kill Putin with drones? And let me tell you, there are all these people around. Some of them, my former colleagues at Stanford, like this character Mike McFaul, who I argue, who drives me crazy. And he's always talking about get rid of Putin. Mr. McFaul ought to think about what could happen instead. If you got rid of Putin, who might replace him? And this is the mindset of American political decision makers. They talk and talk and talk. They demonize this guy who's, I don't have to like him. I don't think Mr. Putin is Mr. Lovable, but he is, he's a modern day Metternich. He's a brilliant strategist, and just spending all your time demonizing rather than trying to understand him and talking about getting rid of him like there would be no negative consequences, like he's the source of the problem. He's not the source of the problem. I mean, the level of naivete that these so-called neoconservatives who think of themselves as realists show in almost every statement they make is shocking. And it's shocking that people accept it. I mean, you correctly say, why aren't people outraged? Why haven't people been outraged for a decade or decades? It's just hard for me to believe. So, but what can you do?
Well, that irresponsibility kind of takes me to my last question, which is
Yes.
more of a recent event, which is this yeah, attack on Russia's nuclear bombers. I mean, this is well, I guess shocking on many levels. One, that one would go to this escalation, but second would be the the lack of clarity around the extent to which NATO countries were involved in the planning, and I guess even worse would be the reactions thereafter. Where would did this almost been celebration in the media and then no condemnation from our politicians, as if criticizing this would be to take Russia's side? I mean, there's something quite frightening. This is a direct attack now on Russia's nuclear bombers, likely with NATO involvement, and there's nothing. I
Well, I'd
mean,
say surely with NATO involvement or surely with American involvement. Now, it may not have been planned. The Ukrainians may not have been given this intelligence data uh, recently, but these strategic systems tend to sit in relatively fixed locations. So, this information was had to be given to them by the Americans or the Brits who would have had access to the American information and then passed it on. And if I were Tulsi Gabbard, I'd be asking questions. Where did they get this from? I'd be really pissed. Where did the Ukrainians get this intelligence information? Because they had to have it from us, Americans, somewhere. Not the Brits had it too. And NATO had it too, because this thing gets shared with these countries. Who gave them this data? And there should be heads rolling. There should be public statements made about, this was unacceptable. This was unauthorized. None of this is happening. It's like, just shows you the Western political leadership is brain dead. It's just, these people have no idea of how serious this kind of conduct is. A direct attack on the strategic forces of Russia, the Soviet Union. This attack that occurred on the early warning radar at Armavir. Unbelievable. This is what got me my status as an internet star. That's when I first started talking on the internet, because I was so concerned because there's so little real analysis, explanation of what the meaning of these kinds of attacks are. But to attack the strategic bombing forces of Russia, I mean, it's beyond belief. And this is the kind of thing that should have been stopped instantly when the attack on the Armavir radar occurred. There should have been information given to the Ukrainians. You do another attack like this, you're on your own. That's what I would have said. You want to have a fight, you know, you're on your own. You get no more weapons from us. You get nothing from us. We're not going to have a global nuclear war because you got something. You have a fight with the Russians. That's what I would have done. Now, of course, I'll never be, you know, even the American arms control community doesn't want me talking. But I mean, it's just it's horrendous what's going on now. And the political left is just as guilty of this as the political right. You know, it's just incredible. The system is brain dead. It's just not learning anything. Doesn't know anything and it doesn't learn anything. It's a pretty good combination.
This is the and then it combined with the idea that it would be good to get rid of Putin. I mean, the reason why Russia's been very restrained and is, in the steady hand is because Putin has a lot of credibility. And, if you would get rid of him and have a more vulnerable, exposed leader, how would they not be able to react to this? This would, could trigger their nuclear retaliatory doctrine. I mean,
Uh,
this is just I can't believe this is reality that we're attacking the strategic nuclear forces of the Russian Federation. It's yeah, it's no, it's mind-boggling though.
I feel much more comfortable knowing that Putin is at the helm of Russia at this time than some of the other players because he has kept his eye on the ball. I don't think he will go. I mean, he'll strike back, he'll do some things, but it won't be escalatory like what's already been done. I'm pretty sure. Maybe I'm wrong. But he's got to be under enormous pressure. It's only because everything he's done has worked so well on behalf of Russia that he will be able to withstand the pressure to do something really escalatory. And that would be a great mistake and great danger for everyone. Most of all, just as much Russia as everybody else. So, and since his concern is Russia and the well-being of Russia, and he understands that an escalation would be of no good for everyone, I'm hopeful that he will keep a lid on things. But this is hard to believe. And the Western response is just, I just don't know what to say. This is the recklessness, the blindness, the stupidity. I mean, the hallucinatory character of even thinking about this kind of thing. I mean, it's just, I just don't have the vocabulary to describe it. I just don't, unfortunately.
Oh, lunacy, I think is yeah, the right word for it. But no, my fear is yeah that the Oreshniks will begin to rain down and
Well, fine. I
because
mean,
well it wouldn't be unthinkable in response to an attack on their nuclear
no, it wouldn't
forces.
be
So,
unthinkable. The Oreshniks could well be a response. No, you know, and
it's
yeah, I have
yeah.
some additional analysis on those if and when we see more of them. I did some additional work on them with explosive warheads and
But
uh,
you do think that they are functional and operational and in
yeah,
plenty of
sure. I
quantity,
mean,
yes?
well, I don't know. The reports are they're manufacturing them in some quantity. You don't need a lot of them. I mean, a few tens of them could do a lot of damage. Uh, I don't think they are the kind of uh, revolutionary weapon that some people have portrayed them to be, but they are formidable weapons. And I think they could be used to great effect again. And,
Yeah.
you know,
So, Professor Postol, thank you so much for your time. It's always interesting and yeah, terrifying to speak with you. So, Appreciate it.
Yeah, like I said, like I usually say, I hope I ruined your day
Uh, you surely
with the
did, so
truth,
thank you.
hopefully. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye bye.